The conversation you're about to hear today on the Media Roundtable is the first time we've released the uncut conversations that became the short series, What's a Podcast? The Revolution Redefined. I'm Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and Baritone One and host of the Media Roundtable podcast. We're giving you the full-length version of specific conversations we had with about 30 of the leaders of podcasting today. That includes creators like Ira Glass, Guy Raz, so many others, as well as leading publishers, advertisers, and thought leaders, where we tried to sit around the table and debate what is a podcast, why does it matter, why'd you get into this to begin with, and what do we need to do to preserve that into the future as we build a bigger definition of what podcasting actually is. Some of these conversations are a snapshot of a very specific moment in time, but they're all durable and timeless in the importance of the conversation. I learned a lot. For me, this whole project was a love letter to podcasting and something that is able to blend real business value with the passion that brought me and so many others into this field. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. So with that, please enjoy this next installment of the full-length interview series, What's a Podcast? Well, welcome to the Media Roundtable. I'm Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and Baritone One. We've been doing this series. We've had about 30 different people come on, trying to explore this question of, in 2025, what is a podcast and why does that even matter to anybody? And we've gotten perspectives on absolutely everything. We've gotten very technical with some folks. We've talked about a lot of the business implications. Today is our final conversation, and I'm so glad that we're ending this way because the person that we're talking to has certainly played a big part in my story coming into this business, and I think for many of us, whether directly or indirectly, it really had a profound impact on the making of this field. I'm talking about Adam Carolla, who doesn't need a long intro here, but he's done all of it, TV, film, radio, and that's after carpentry, boxing, a whole nother career. So, Adam was one of the first people that anybody knew as a professional in media who actually took the plunge and said they were going to go all in on this medium. And as we're having these conversations, one of the things that's so hard for people that weren't a part of this at the beginning is to explain to them what it was like and why it was different and what was so special about it. And that's really the essence of why we're doing any of this, because there's a lot that's changing in the marketplace. There's a lot of different expectations. There's a lot of consolidation of ownership, and a lot of tech has come in, which is largely a good thing. But in the process, things are being lost or have the potential to be lost. And so we're revisiting why any of that is actually important and what it was that was so different about this platform, this medium, from other types of media that we had all been accustomed to, that's actually worth being intentional about preserving even as things continue to change. So Adam, welcome to the Media Roundtable. Welcome back. So glad to be having this conversation with you.
Thanks, Dan.
I met you, I don't know, it's probably 2012. You were pushing your new podcast over at the Clear Channel iHeart offices in Burbank on the Petros and Money show. I followed you out of the studio and asked you if I could help bring brands onto your show, and you helped facilitate that. And that was a turning point in my career and really a jumping off point that helped us launch the business that became Oxford Road. But that was when the industry, this is pre-serial. This is when the whole industry is in its infancy. And you had a view that is probably different, not just because of the timing of when you got into the field, but also because you really knew what it was like working with traditional media. And so do you mind just starting to tell us the story a little bit about the pirate ship, about what it was that brought you in and what made it so different?
Well, I had been working in radio for a long time, probably going on about 13 plus years. Well, I guess more if you go back to Kevin and Bean days. My professional comedic career started in radio, and that's basically what I did. I did TV shows and other endeavors outside of it, but I'd always continued radio. So I had a full-time radio job when I was doing multiple TV shows, and I still did radio every day because I always enjoyed radio. And I enjoyed communicating that way. I realized that makeup and wardrobe and the whole visual aspect of it was a little bit of a distraction. And I just sort of like the intimacy of talking to people, like really getting into their heads, So when the radio ended for me in 09, I think it was about February 09, I was aware that a lot of people listen to my morning terrestrial radio on the computer. And I was never tech savvy or had any interest in the computer or emails or anything. It wasn't my world. Is carpentry and mechanics and boxing and stuff. And it's just kind of a blue collar world where technology doesn't really help. And it's not what I want to be under the hood, wrenching around and not texting somebody. So
is that still true, by the way?
Yes, it doesn't work for me as well as it works for other people, which seems like it needs an explanation, but it's just stuff doesn't work that well for me. When I went and did Celebrity Apprentice, they said to me, you're going to have to go live in Trump Tower for 3 months. And I said, I got to have control over my TV set. I can't do the thing where I sit in a hotel room and I just turn on the TV and whatever's on is on, and I can't really control it very well. You know that hotel?
Yeah.
room
Oh, yeah. You're a hostage.
You're hostage. And I love TV. And I said, I don't know if I can be away from TV for 4 months or at the mercy of the TV. You come home, you wanted to watch this show, but that show ended and you can't tape it. So somebody said, get a sling box. The sling box is going to work. And I said, it'll never work. And they said, what are you talking about? I have one. We use one. We travel with one. It's great. I go, it's never going to work. It's never. And they went, why? Why wouldn't it work? And I said, because it's me. Believe me, this isn't going to work. About the 5th time they tried to get it to work in Trump Tower, they just went, yeah, it's not going to work. And I said, I told you it wasn't going to work.
And immediately got off the show.
Immediately got myself booted off the show. So technology and me are not really friends, but I like 2x4s and crescent wrenches and stuff. But fine. But I had a terrestrial radio show which was called Loveline, and Loveline was in, I don't know, 100 and some odd markets, including your Minneapolises and your Chicagos, and it was everywhere. It was everywhere. But then I stopped Loveline and I went to take over for Stern on the West Coast. And all of a sudden I went from, I would say, I don't know how many, 120 markets to 12 markets or 9 markets or whatever the hell, Vegas, Seattle, Portland, San Diego, I don't know, 10 markets. And that meant there were 100 markets that used to listen to me on a daily basis who could not hear me anymore. And what I didn't know is many of those people went to their computers and went to the station's website or whatever and streamed the show. It was essentially podcasting before podcasting. They went on, and I would talk to people and they'd go, oh yeah, I hear your show. I'm in Hawaii. I'd go, I'm not on in Hawaii. I go, well, you're online. I go online and I go to the KLSX website in Los Angeles and I can hear the show through the website. So it started to happen that the KLSX people who were radio people and kind of old guard radio, they'd come in and they'd hem and haw about the ratings. We would be number 1 in Vegas and number 1 in Seattle, but number 5 in LA. And they go, we're number 5. We got to get that number up, and then at some point they'd go, and you had 16 million minutes of streaming last month, which is second only to the fan in New York who carries the Mets and the Yankees games. And I said, well, that's something, isn't it? And they said, no. And I said, well, that sounds good, though. All those millions of minutes of people listening to the show on their computer. And they went, well, we can't monetize that. We're not selling commercials against that. So fix your ratings in LA, or get your ratings up in LA. And then they did it again a couple of times. And they go, oh, now you're at 18 million minutes of streaming. And I said, that sounds good or promising or something. And they just went, we don't care. And no, it's neither here nor there to us. So then when the station flipped formats and the whole morning radio, terrestrial radio, went away, I walked out of there going, well, what about that 16 million minutes of streaming? What about those people, And to them, it was some sort of vestigial byproduct of something that they couldn't use. But I was like, look, if there's going to be that many people listening to that many minutes, certainly there's got to be some business model for that. So I left on a Friday and started podcasting the following Monday, which was actually Sunday night. It wasn't even 2 days. I mean, it was Sunday night because it dropped Monday. And they were right that there wasn't any way to monetize it initially, just because nobody tried it or heard of it or whatever. There was nobody who came before, sort of thing. But I had a severance. I had like 9 or 10 months left on a contract. So
well done.
Yeah, I know. It's always been my dream. I mean, earlier when I was on a construction site, my dream was to fall off a ladder and get paid to stay home for like 3 weeks. But now this is even better. And I knew I had about 10 months of pay. But I also had 2-year-old twins and a mortgage and a lifestyle, and I didn't really know what was next for me. But I knew I had 10 months to figure it out. But streaming cost a lot of money back then. And my streaming was pretty robust. And thus, I was out of pocket usually about $9,000 a month I had to pay for streaming. Now, I don't know anything about technology. It would always just be like, well, the bad news is it costs $9,000 a month for you to stream your show. And the good news is it's because it's popular that there's that much streaming going on. So not only was I not getting paid and did I not have another job, but it was costing me thousands of dollars a month to provide this show for free that had no advertisers. So it was a little sticky at the beginning.
It's amazing. I mean, first of all, a radio, they couldn't get there fast enough. And
Right.
had such a chance, right? But it's also so interesting that, for somebody that quote unquote doesn't know anything about technology, you bet the farm on tech early, and you were right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this sounds douchey or not, but I was kind of betting on myself. I wasn't really betting on tech. I mean, half on tech, but I was sort of betting on me. I was like, look, if I build it, they will come, was kind of my vibe.
Well, and a lot of people have done that and they didn't, but in your case, you were right to make both of those bets, right? And so did you find that, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say what I ended up, there were people podcasting before me. So I don't lay claim to inventing podcasting, but I do sort of lay claim to inventing the live podcast, because what had happened is by the end of the first year, I was about 8 or 9 months in. I was like, we got to figure out some way to make money doing this show, because I'm not getting paid and the streaming costs and there's no advertisers. And a guy I was working with, Mike August, said, I talked to the Improv in Irvine and I got them to book your podcast live. We're going to do a live podcast at Irvine and we're going to sell tickets. So I was like, oh, so if I can sell out the Irvine Improv, then I can get money for doing a live podcast. So we started doing live podcasting in 2009, toward the end of 2009. And then we're able to book live shows everywhere and just get paid as if I was a stand-up comedian, essentially. And that was a way to monetize the show, not, directly, but indirectly.
You figured it out. Well, and I know from just when I started coming around the studio 2012, 2013, you were in a number of lines of business that I think today is being treated like it's new, like it's novel to have your own brand, right? But you had Mangria on tap, which was your brand, and you had live appearances, and you got into subscriptions and things like that I think the industry is still kind of chasing. So I think you were way ahead of it in that. When I talk about the history of the field, the thing I note about your entry that was significant, it's not like you were the first one to do it, no, but you were the first one that really had other options. Like, you had already been a famous person making money, and well known across the country, that really said, yeah, I could keep chasing that, but I'm going to actually double down on this. And I think you had probably more to lose. And so I think that was novel.
Sorry for cutting you off, but I did have it was funny. I had a moment, right? I'd have to go back and look at the calendar, but it was right about it was about 10 months or a year in. And I don't know, Clear Channel or some radio, whoever came calling. And they'd worked out a syndicated drive time radio show that was, daily. I can't remember, 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock or something. And it was like $1 million plus contract. And it was a contract, because I'd had a contract I'd had a contract my whole radio career. And now I have no contract and no real means of support per se, and monetization. And so the plan was like, maybe if I can get some kind of 3-year contract or something, I can get back in terrestrial radio and I can guarantee this money, because I said family and my wife didn't work, and everyone just spent money like crazy at my house. And I was like, I got to figure out a way to get this money coming in. And so I met with these guys. We had multiple meetings, and my agent flew in from New York and blah, blah, blah. And it was a done deal. And I remember very clearly, I was doing shows in Kansas City. And I was just sitting in my hotel room on a Saturday, and I just called my agent. I just had an impulse to call him, and I just called him, and I said, it was a weird thing. I called him and I just go, James, hey. And he just paused and he goes, you don't want to do the radio, do you?
Oh,
I said, no, I don't. I just don't. I don't really have a reason why, and I can't really explain it, and it doesn't really make sense, but I don't. I think things are starting to pick up in this world, and I just don't want to go back to terrestrial. And he's never. I thought we're going to have a big argument about it, and he just went, all right, I'll tell him. And we just hung up the phone. Wow. And that was the last terrestrial radio conversation I had.
Okay, so here's the point. You opted on in this new kind of, they still call it the Wild Wild West. I think it really was then. And you think about those maybe 5 years you were doing it before cereal came out and everybody knew what it was all of a sudden and all the big money came in. What was it about the industry at that time that was attractive compared to all of the traditional media that you had worked in before? Why was it worth the risk?
Um, I never really looked at things as a risk, because I've always sort of played with house money when it comes to show business, because I grew up very, not really in squalor, but I grew up poor. And then I worked donkey work, digging ditches and as a laborer and just driving beat up trucks and moving piles of drywall all day and just real physical, kind of dirty, grunty carpet cleaning and earth. I've crawled under 35 buildings in my life and dug footings with a coffee can on my belly because there wasn't enough room to get a shovel in there and stuff. I've just done dirty, hard, humbling jobs. And the idea that I was going to get paid to sit around and talk was sort of an insane notion. So it was never real. I mean, I always just wanted to say what I wanted to say. It was always kind of house money. I was way ahead of wherever I thought I was ever going to be. I had a skill. I guess I knew I had a skill, which was carpentry, which was, I guess, if the wheels really came off the wagon, I could strap back on the tool bags. It's weird. It's more of a psychological thing than a financial thing, because the difference between carpenter and successful podcasters basically getting $56,000 a year versus millions a year, it's not exactly a lateral move. But there's kind of a psychological part, which is, I would tell people, I have a skill. I'm a carpenter. So I'm not going to eat shit. I'm not going to do it. I don't have to. I have a skill. Skill doesn't pay anything, but I have a skill.
So you had that fallback. But what I'm really driving at, Adam, is what was it about podcasting that was better than working in the more mature industries?
It wasn't. I mean, for me, I know everyone talks a lot about freedom, but I come from K-Rock and Loveline. So I was never really having the man hover over me, telling me to mind my P's and Q's.
You didn't have FCC problems. That was never an issue.
Well, I was in what they call safe harbor, which is at night. And I had a doctor with me. So I got to say stuff that other people don't get to say, because I was in safe harbor and I had a doctor and we were dispensing advice, So I didn't get too much of that. But look, you still have to mind your P's and Q's. You don't get to just talk however you want to talk. I never felt that encumbered by the format. And I was also realized really quickly that if you're successful, they leave you alone. So I've told people, anybody ever want to get in a radio, I go, the number one reason you want to have high ratings is to be left alone. It's not to be popular or get bonuses or anything. When your ratings are high, they leave you alone. When your ratings are down, you have to have a stupid meeting after every show and hear everyone's bad ideas. And you can't shake them off because you have low ratings. Every idea is a good idea. So if your ratings are good, you have autonomy. And my ratings were always good enough that I was left alone. So it wasn't really a creative thing. It was more, it's like I just did a dry bar set, and it was a clean set in Utah and in Provo, Utah. And I had to clean up my act to do 45 minutes of clean. Now, it's my material, it's my ideas, and it's my jokes, but here's the provisions. It needs to be clean, That's kind of how radio was for me. It's like, look, I'm on stage, I got the mic, it's my show, but here are the rules. Then you go to the Improv in Tempe and you say whatever you want. And that's kind of what podcasting is.
All right, so the freedom piece wasn't so much of a material difference for you. It was more on instinct, it sounds like, and just knowing that you had confidence you could do it. You had enough logic to say, well, there's a lot of people listening online, I can do something with that. Did you ever feel like, I mean, and I don't even know if you feel like part of the podcasting community or feel like you were part of a movement, right? But was there any part of that kind of felt like you were in a boom town in the early days and you're watching all the infrastructure pop up around you, and some of it's shitty, but some of it's like, well, okay, we're desirous of having that infrastructure. Like, did you feel any of that?
There used to be, at the beginning, probably more of a community of podcasters, a sort of handful of people, you knew all their names. There's a lot of cross-pollination. You'd go do this guy's show, that guy go do your show. Got sued by the patent trolls. That I became sort of the face of the patent troll. So there was some community there and some cross-pollination and some whatever. But I've kind of noticed as it turned into more of a business and more money was more of an influx of money, people now sort of hive themselves off. There's not the cross-pollination as much anymore. And it's kind of sad. In a way, I liked the days when this guy do my show and I do that guy's show and nobody cared. Now people are like making business decisions.
Well, and I think, just to show my hand a little bit, when we look at the business, and I think about part of it for me is like just being passionate about what podcasting allowed, because I felt like there was a renaissance of things that with radio chasing ratings in local markets, you could only talk about, just a few things. Podcasting really opened that up and took away all the gatekeepers, right? And, I always thought it was interesting that you would talk about your show as the pirate ship, because that was the vibe to me. I felt like I never saw anybody that illustrated the pirate radio feel of that era. Having come out of, the biggest corporation in radio, I really saw a significant difference. And I thought that the freedom was interesting. The opportunity to get into subjects that would never be supported by your program director was interesting. And today, like, just flashing forward, I know we don't have a lot of time, but, YouTube has come in a big way. Spotify's obviously been here for a minute, but they're changing kind of what it means, and definitions are shifting. And I think we used to think of this thing, even if you had a camera on, it was still really about what you said. It was about audio. It was about a conversation. And now the cameras are playing a much bigger role, and the algorithms are playing a much bigger role. And with, not to get too technical, but, the RSS meant that you couldn't get deplatformed. You could just put it out everywhere. But now that everybody's kind of chasing one platform, or platforms are really trying to lock you in and fight for a share of consumption, it's starting to change some of the nature of the business when you're chasing an algorithm rather than kind of the meritocracy of how it started. Is there anything else that you're seeing now that we're in 2025 that when you look back at then and you think about the world you're in today, like, is there anything you see besides the kind of community of guests cross-pollinating? Are there other things that you think might be going away that were good, or that you hope to see rewarded in the future by the business, so that it doesn't just, my fear is either A, we become radio with 20 minutes of ads an hour and everything's kind of cookie cutter, or worse, it's all just YouTube videos and there's no distinction anymore, right? I don't know if you share any of that.
Well, I mean, look, Tailhook started as just a handful of like Marine pilots in San Diego drinking some beers, and then at some point they're in Las Vegas and there's 5,000 people showing up at their convention. And it's just, that's kind of the nature of the beast. There's a lot of like stunt casting now, like Michelle Obama and her brother are going to do a podcast. Like, are they really into this? Is this something they wanted to do, or just somebody wave some money in front of them or tell them it seemed like a good idea? There's an in vogue sort of part of it, where it's just.
Are they going to lose money every month for, the better part of a year to gut it out, right? And I think with all the big contracts, once there's a backlash on that, it's like it calls into question, if you're serious about it, are you willing to bleed for it? And I think you really did that, right?
Yeah, well, look, here's how it works with Meghan Markle and her podcast or whatever. It's the theorem of Magic Johnson, the late night talk show host, because they gave him a show in, I don't know, 95 or something. Magic Johnson is beloved. He's everyone looks up to him, and he has a great personality, and he's an NBA legend. So why not give him a late night talk show? And I tell everyone, the second he steps out to do the monologue, he's no longer Magic Johnson, the NBA star. He's Magic Johnson, the late night host. And if he sucks as Magic Johnson, the late night host, then we don't care about his triple doubles. He's now just a bad late night host. And you can take the most famous person in the world, but at some point, they sidle up to the microphone. They're now a podcaster. And there's a novel interest, for the first episode. But if Michelle Obama doesn't have anything to say, she's not going to get by, just like Magic Johnson isn't going to get into year 13 as a late night host if he's not good at it, So there's a lot of stunt casting going on now. And there's a lot of people probably, quite frankly, shouldn't be doing it who are doing it. And then, like you said, with radios, there's going to be a lot of formatting going on now because radio broke off into 10 different formats, and it will probably follow the same arc as terrestrial radio, which is, formatting and corporatization and commercials and stunt casting and stuff like that. And then eventually it'll sort of collapse under its own weight and it'll rebuild again.
Any thoughts on the emphasis on video? And I don't even know if this is touching you, but like, there's not a lane for audio only. Like but the common thinking is you have to play to the camera.
I don't
have consequences?
I'm curious about that, because I feel like the people that really enjoy podcasts put the earbuds in and go hit the trail kind of thing, or run on the treadmill or wherever that thing is. And to me, the thing I liked about radio and podcasting was the non-visual aspect of it. I think the words penetrate deeper. If I did a podcast, or if anyone did a podcast and they just laid out a bunch of information, World War II started in 1914 and ended in 1919, and World War I, and then World War II started in 1939 and ended in 1945, and the Eiffel Tower's 1,126 feet tall. If you watch that show, if you watch that podcast and there was a good-looking woman telling you all that information, you'd retain 10% of it. But if you put earbuds in and lay down on your bed and close your eyes, you'd retain 65% of it. And I just think it's a deeper retention and penetration minus the visual, because the visual always sort of pulls you away. Like a lot of times when people are telling me things, I close my eyes and they want to know what's wrong with me. And I go, I want to really listen and really understand. I want to picture what you're describing to me. If I stand here, I'm going to see a Corvette go down the street. I'm going to look at it. So I don't like the visual component, but for financial reasons, it's now just become a sort of imperative. And so thus we do have cameras set up here as well.
Okay. Final question for you here. Like, you're not a big ego guy, and I don't suspect you're going to, be the chairman of, the people to preserve podcasting's integrity, right? But you have had a big influence here, and I do think you helped make it real and created an industry that I think has become a cultural phenomenon for a reason. I think a lot of it is that it was led by voice, and a lot of it was like the freedom of not having the gatekeepers. But as you think about the future of the medium, is there one thought of something that was true about it that you hope stays true in the future?
I think it is going to be a pure meritocracy, and in a world where we argue over why is that person there and who hired that guy, and is that guy there because of his nationality, or is that guy there because he's the boss's son? In podcasting, you could take whomever the biggest podcast distributor is, and that guy's son could start a podcast, and unless that guy's son had a lot to say, it would fail. It's pure meritocracy, and there's going to be flashes in the pan, and there's going to be that guy's popular, and I don't really get it because I don't think he's that funny. There's always going to be sort of that, but big picture, the people with the voices and the people with the ideas are going to win, and that's what makes it pure.
Well, I hope you're right. And thank you for coming and being the final word in this discussion, Adam. You've done a lot for all of us, whether or not you know it. So appreciate you coming back, and looking forward to the next one.
Thanks, Dan.
That was another conversation from our full series, What's a Podcast? And whether you're a podcaster, an advertiser, or somebody who just cares about this space, I hope this stretched you. It's certainly stretched me, and is giving us a lot to think about in how we want to live going forward and protect and preserve the essence of the medium while preparing for the changes we need to make to evolve on the road ahead. If you want to hear the full limited 3-part docuseries, What's a Podcast? The Revolution Redefined, check it out wherever you listen to your shows. But if you want to go beyond that and you want to be a part of the movement that we've got here, it's not just about our defining it. It's about figuring out a path forward. Go to our link in the show description and download our free white paper, What is a Podcast? That has research from over 4,000 Americans on what consumers believe that the industry is. And make sure you sign our petition, also available in the link in the show description, to keep podcasting open. This show is not just about content, learning, or entertainment. This is about having a real effect in the real world on issues that are important to all of us. We hope you'll continue to be a part of it and bring this into real life. Go to oxfordroad.com for more resources, or click the links in the show description. Thanks for your time.